Welcome to Infidelity Nest. In today's video, the house stood quietly at the edge of town, not large enough to be grand, not small enough to be forgotten. It was the kind of place that collected seasons rather than years, its walls remembering laughter, loss, and the soft weight of time. It was Mark's house, technically, but to everyone who had ever stepped inside, it was unmistakably Sarah's domain. I had been part of that household rhythm for almost a decade. My name is Liam, 22 years old, an ordinary observer of other people's extraordinary lives. When Mark, my childhood friend, left for university across the country, he asked me to check on his mother occasionally. At first it felt like a small favor, the sort of gesture friends exchange without thinking. But as the months passed, my visits became more regular, almost ritualistic. The house began to feel less like someone else's home, and more like a mirror reflecting the quiet spaces inside myself. Sarah was 55. Poised and measured, the kind of woman whose calm carried its own authority. There was nothing fragile about her maturity. It was confident, earned, and quietly luminous. She had spent much of her life nurturing others, her son, her husband, her students at the small community college where she taught literature. Yet, beneath that composed exterior, there was a solitude I recognized too well. When Mark was home, the place buzzed with activity. Guitar music echoing down the hall, the scent of late-night snacks, the occasional shouting match over a game on TV. After he left, silence crept in like fog. The first few weeks, Sarah said she enjoyed the peace, but eventually she admitted that peace and loneliness often wear the same disguise. I began stopping by in the evenings under the pretense of checking on the garden or fixing a leaky tap. In truth, I think we both needed company that didn't demand too much. Our conversations started with safe topics: weather, work, what Mark had written in his latest email, but soon drifted into more personal territories. Memory, aging, the strange stillness that comes after years of noise. Sarah had a way of speaking that turned ordinary observations into small pieces of philosophy. She would hold a cup of coffee and say, "You know, Liam, houses have heartbeats. They slow down when people leave." I didn't know whether she meant it literally or as a metaphor, but either way, I listened. One rainy Tuesday, we sat at the kitchen table while thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The scent of rain mixed with the aroma of roasted herbs. It was the same meal she used to make when Mark and I were teenagers. Nostalgia filled the air more strongly than any spice. She said, almost absently, "Mark sounds settled. He's doing well." Then after a pause, she added, "I'm proud of him, of course, but I realize now that pride and emptiness can coexist." Her words struck me. There was no self-pity in her voice, just quiet acknowledgement. That night as we talked, something shifted, not between us in any improper way, but within each of us. I realized that both of us were learning how to exist after someone else's departure. Over the next few weeks, our conversations deepened. She spoke about her youth, about how quickly purpose can become identity. When you spend decades taking care of people, she said, you start to believe your value depends on their dependence. I didn't know how to answer, so I just listened. I began to notice the small signs of how time changes people. The books that used to be scattered across the living room were now stacked neatly, untouched. The once lively kitchen radio stayed silent. She would stand at the window sometimes, staring into the garden as if searching for evidence that life was still happening out there. One evening, while repairing a loose shelf, I found an old photograph tucked behind a stack of cookbooks. It showed Sarah in her 20s, laughing beside a man, Mark's father, during what looked like a summer festival. The colors had faded, but the joy was unmistakable. I left it on the counter without comment. Later, she noticed it and smiled faintly. "That was the last time I saw him before we moved here," she said. He was a good man, but good doesn't always mean present. It was the first time she had spoken about her husband with that kind of honesty. I realized then that my role in that house wasn't just about keeping her company. It was about bearing witness to the truth she rarely voiced. Months passed, and the rhythm of our evenings became its own quiet comfort. I would bring groceries. She would make tea. We talked about everything except what truly weighed on us, the fear of being forgotten. Sometimes she would say, "When you're young, you think the world notices you. When you're older, you realize the world is busy. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her she wasn't invisible, but I also knew words often fail when someone needs proof instead of comfort, so I showed up week after week. Presence became our language. One afternoon, she decided to repaint the living room. Change, she said, doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. As we worked, the sound of brush strokes filled the silence that used to feel oppressive. For the first time, I saw light return to her face, a small but unmistakable spark of agency. During those hours, we spoke about small victories, the satisfaction of a finished wall, the beauty of fresh color, the strange freedom of deciding something for yourself. It's funny, she said. I thought growing older meant stability, but sometimes it means learning how to start again. The more time I spent there, the more I saw my own reflection in her struggles. I, too, was learning to navigate transitions. The uncertainty of adulthood, the fading simplicity of friendships, the endless question of purpose. Her wisdom became my education. One evening, we sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset fade behind the trees. The sky burned gold and violet. "Do you ever feel," she asked quietly, "like you're living in the aftermath of something you didn't even notice ending?" "Yes," I answered, "all the time." That was the first moment we shared real understanding. Not romantic, not sentimental, just human. The connection that happens when two people admit they're both searching for meaning in the same silence. As autumn arrived, the house transformed. She filled it with small signs of life. Fresh flowers, warm lighting, music that drifted softly through the rooms. It wasn't about erasing loneliness, but about coexisting with it gracefully. Our conversations turned philosophical. We talked about identity and reinvention, about how every person is really a collection of unfinished chapters. She told me, "We are never done being who we are. We just keep editing." I remember one night particularly well. We were sorting through old boxes in the attic. Dust hung in the air like memories refusing to settle. She found an old letter from Mark when he was 8 years old, thanking her for a birthday cake. She read it aloud, laughing at his misspellings, and then she grew quiet. "It's strange," she said. "The people we raise eventually become strangers with familiar faces." I thought about my own parents, about how distance reshapes love into something quieter, but no less real. That night, I realized how courageously she faced her solitude, not by fighting it, but by learning from it. Winter arrived early that year. The cold made the house feel smaller, but our conversations grew warmer. We talked about books, about art, about the purpose of remembering. "Memories," she said once, "are just stories we tell ourselves to keep living." Sometimes I would record our talks on my phone, not to share them, but to preserve them. Her words had a way of making the ordinary sound profound. When I replayed them later, I noticed how often she spoke in metaphors about renewal. "Even a garden rests in winter," she said. "It's not death, it's preparation." One evening, after a particularly heavy snowstorm, the power went out. We lit candles and sat across from each other in the dim flicker of light. The room glowed softly, as if time itself had slowed down. "Do you miss the noise?" I asked. "Sometimes," she replied, "but I've learned that silence has a rhythm too. It's just harder to dance to." That night felt symbolic, a reminder that even darkness can be companionable when you stop fearing it. As months rolled on, Sarah began volunteering at the local library. "It's strange," she told me later. "I used to think I needed someone to fill this space. Turns out I just needed to use it differently." Her laughter became more frequent, lighter. She started hosting small gatherings with her colleagues, cooking new recipes, and even joined a book club. Watching her re-enter the world was like watching a house slowly light up after years of dimness. I still visited, but less out of concern and more out of friendship. Our roles had shifted. She no longer needed saving, and I no longer came seeking purpose. We had both found something steadier. Mutual respect, shared growth. On Mark's next visit home, I saw the pride in her eyes when she greeted him. Their conversations were easy, unstrained. That night, she told me, "Sometimes letting go is the most faithful thing you can do for someone." Her words lingered with me long after I left. As spring returned, the garden bloomed again, fuller than before. She spent hours tending to it, humming softly, the way she used to when Mark was small. I realized then that the house itself had healed. Months later, I moved to another city for work. Before leaving, I stopped by one last time. The house smelled of fresh paint and rosemary. She met me at the door with her usual calm smile. "I suppose this is goodbye for now," I said. "For now," she answered. "But remember, people don't disappear from each other's stories. They just turn up in new chapters." As I drove away, I looked back and saw her standing in the dough,